The Ford Capri came out in the 1960s, and while I don't remember it because I'm in my 30s, my father does, who's been a car mechanic for the last 40 years, and he actually found it to be quite a stylish proposition back in the day, and still to this day now, if you do see them on the road, well, definitely do give them a honk. But a lot has changed since then, and yes, Ford purists are absolutely going to hate this because the Capri is now an all-electric SUV. In fact, it shares many underpinnings with the Volkswagen ID.5. And the reason I say that is because Ford and Volkswagen entered a partnership, and this is actually using the MEB platform, which is present on the ID.4 and the ID.5. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, the new Capri is available in 3 different trims, 3 different battery packs, and also 2 different powertrains. Now, to be more specific, you have got the Style, the Select and the Premium, which are available in a 52, 77 and 79 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and you've got a rear-wheel drive and an all-wheel drive configuration. Prices range from roughly £41,500 and extend up to £56,000 without options. And yes, in case you're wondering, that is a slight bit more expensive than the equivalent VW ID.5. Now, in terms of warranty, you've got 2 years and unlimited mileage, 5 years service plan with roadside assistance, and 8 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first, on the battery. Now, in this review, which will be covered in such a format, we'll see if it's actually worth its price tag, and of course how it compares to its main competitors, and of course its sibling, the ID.5. Now, before proceeding, I would just like to point out that if you do want to find some of the best deals for the Ford Capri, make sure you check them down in the links in the description below, the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. So let's kick things off and talk about its electric range, because that's what really stood out for me when I reviewed the VW ID.5. Now, here in the Ford Capri, very much like the Volkswagen vehicles, you have to splash out an additional £1,050 on a heat pump. In case you're wondering why that might be of importance, well, quite simply, it adds to the overall efficiency when heating up the cabin, namely in colder climate scenarios. And that is actually quite disheartening because a lot of its competitors actually do offer that as standard. Now, nonetheless, in terms of the WLTP mixed driving range that the manufacturer claims, it very much depends as to the overall battery pack capacity that you go for. And it's worth noting over here that the net capacity is actually quoted rather than the gross capacity like you'd find on Volkswagen vehicles. So therefore, in terms of the discrepancy between the two manufacturers, it's gross versus net claims. Net is, of course, a lot more realistic because that's actually what you're using. Now, here in the Capri with the 53 kilowatt-hour model, you have got a WLTP range of 231 to 242 miles. The 77 kilowatt-hour model has a claim of 369 to 389 miles, while the 79 kilowatt-hour model has got a range claim of 346 miles. Now, the vehicle on review is the premium trim with the all-wheel drive powertrain, therefore the 79 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and it also has the optional heat pump included. Now, from my own mixed driving tests, I actually netted a very impressive 280 to 300 miles. And that is actually in line with what I would expect it to achieve, purely because when I reviewed the VW ID.5, that had a heat pump as well, and also was a rear-wheel drive configuration only, therefore getting better range, it got roughly 325 miles. And as you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, the Ford Capri does certainly perform extraordinarily well. Indeed, it's among one of the longest range EVs out there on the market, namely when it comes to the all-electric SUV class. Now, for you to add to the overall battery pack capacity, and by that I mean recouping energy while on the move, you want to enable regenerative braking. And here it's done via the gear selector that can be found on the right-hand side. And right now, if I were just to speed up to 10 miles an hour and lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will start decelerating, but it will not come to a complete standstill. Indeed, over here, unlike a lot of its competitors, and again, same complaint that could have been said about a Volkswagen vehicle, is that you still do not have a one-pedal drive. Why would you want one pedal drive? Well, quite simply, it adds to the overall convenience when you're driving in and around the city and harvests as much energy as possible back into the battery pack. Now, of course, if you do not want regenerative braking, you can simply shift to D mode, and therefore when you lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle keeps on coasting. Now, aside from recouping energy while on the move, you can also plug it in. And here, via CCS port, it can take between 135, 145 or 185 kilowatts of input, depending on which model you go for. And here it allows you to go from 10 to 80% in roughly 25 to 28 minutes. There's also an 11 kilowatt onboard charger. making it quite convenient if you have access to a 3-phase power supply, and therefore via its Type 2 port you can go from 0 to 100% in 8 hours. Connect it up to a regular 7 kilowatt wall box and it'll take you roughly 12 hours. And as for a 3-pin input, it'll take you in excess of 36 hours. Another important factor when it comes to looking at a family-sized SUV is the overall driving comfort. And unfortunately over here, in comparison to its Volkswagen alternative, it does feel a little bit stiffer. Indeed, over here, when it came to going around potholes or speed bumps, or when it came to those anomalies on those more challenging country routes, it just felt that it was not as comfortable. And therefore I could hear a little bit of the rebound from the suspension system, and also a little low-end resonance that could be heard. Or that could be in part due to the fact that this press vehicle was fitted with a larger 21-inch alloys. Nonetheless, what I'm trying to convey over here is that it's not as soft as the Volkswagen alternative, and if I were to compare and contrast it with some others out there, for example with what Citroën or Audi offer, then it doesn't exactly stand a chance. Equally over here, when it comes to looking at some of its nearest competitors, for example with what Tesla or MG offer, then here it's pretty much on par. As for the overall driving dynamics, well, in my opinion, it's not a sporty SUV. Despite the overall badge and what Ford has tried to do with the suspension system, you do encounter body lean, and in terms of its sport mode preset, you don't exactly have that one-to-one connection with the front axle. Still, it's not too bad, and I do appreciate the fact that this vehicle has got the all-wheel drive configuration, and as a result, when it came to putting my foot down to the metal, it didn't suffer from any sort of wheel spin or torque steer, and it felt pretty planted on the ground. This perfectly brings me on to performance, and here the rear-wheel drive 52 kilowatt-hour model has got 125 kilowatts or 168 horsepower. It also has got 310 newton meters of torque. It'll go from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 8.7 seconds. While the 77 kilowatt-hour model ups the ante at 210 kilowatts or 282 horsepower and 545 newton meters of torque. It'll get to 62 miles an hour in 6.4 seconds. In terms of the all-wheel drive model, which is on review with its 79 kilowatt-hour battery pack, it has got 250 kilowatts of power or 335 horsepower and a whopping 679 newton meters of torque. It also gets to 62 miles an hour in just 5.3 seconds. In fact, I had it tested using Race Logic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 1.43 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 2.1 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in just 4.86 seconds, so yes, faster than the manufacturer's claim, 50 to 70 miles an hour in 2.42 seconds, and also a peak acceleration of 0.68 G. So when it comes to putting your foot down to the metal, it really does fly. As for its top speed, it's electronically limited to 99 to 111 miles an hour, depending on which model you choose. Now, while that's all very well and good, I should point out that the brakes felt a bit spongy. And indeed over here, it didn't inspire that much confidence when it comes to putting my foot down on the brake pedal. For example, on a country road while driving at 60 miles an hour and in a safe manner when there are no cars around, the vehicle decelerated a bit too slowly for my liking. The same sort of complaints could have been said about the Tesla Model Y and including some other vehicles from the Volkswagen Group and other. But here, given Ford's pedigree in the motorsport division, one might have expected the Capri to be fitted with beefier and more adequate brakes, but unfortunately that's not the case. It is worth highlighting over here and re-emphasizing this was of course using the all-wheel drive model, which has got quite a bit more performance and the largest battery pack, which therefore means it's shifting a lot more weight and trying to bring it to a standstill even quicker. This might be a bit more of a non-issue in the entry-level 52 kilowatt-hour model, which has got less performance and of course less weight. So next up we get onto its interior design, and when I first sat inside the Capri, it really reminded me of a Volkswagen. Not only because of the use of materials which do feel a little bit cheap for a 50 to 60,000 pound SUV, because you've got some harsh plastic that can be found towards the lower portion of the door trims, the center console and the dashboard, but also because you have got that new Volkswagen Group smell. A little bit hard to describe, but for those people who are aware of that, you'll know exactly what I mean. Furthermore, I'm not too fond of the use of capacitive and haptic buttons that can be found towards the center console and also on the steering wheel. Here, when it comes to the latter, when you're cornering at speed, sometimes you'll accidentally initiate a setting or move something across, and in terms of that haptic feel, well, sometimes feels a little bit slow to respond. I just wish Ford had used traditional buttons instead, but alas, that's not the case. Thankfully, however, you have got traditional stalks, one of which is actually used for your drive mode selector, which does actually become pretty intuitive to use once you get your head around it. In terms of your climate controls and all the other settings that you'll want to play around with, they're all done via the portrait 14.6-inch display, which is actually movable. Here you can indeed pull it upwards, for example, if you want a little bit better view of your navigation system or the media, and then you can pull it down if you want a little less distraction. I do think this is a fantastic use of technology and also optimization within the cabin by Ford, and it's something I wish that a lot more manufacturers would do. For example, with BYD vehicles, you've got a rotatable screen, whereas over here you've got a movable screen. So it's really nice thinking, and you've got a little physical button as such, which allows you to drag it up and down. And yes, this will reveal some extra storage, which I'll touch upon shortly. Now, in terms of the display itself, it's actually very responsive, vivid, and intuitively laid out. It also supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay over a wired and wireless transmission. Furthermore, these third-party mobile operating systems feed through turn-based navigation data straight to the fully digitalized 5.3-inch instrument cluster, which is somewhat customizable by going left and right on the steering wheel, allowing you to see the driver assistance systems, or for example, your trip counter, the navigation, or indeed your traversing speed. Indeed, this is very similar to what you'd find on a Volkswagen vehicle, and it's no surprise over here. I've got no complaints whatsoever in this department because the display itself provides you all the key information that you require, and it's also pretty vivid. Should you want some of that information projected on your windscreen, you'll want to go for a head-up display, and it's actually present on the Ford Capri, and therefore keeps your eyes planted on the road and therefore adds to the overall safety credentials. The only caveat, however, is that you'll have to go for the driver assistance pack, and that will set you back a whopping £1,300, £1,800 or £2,200 depending on the trim level chosen. It's a shame over here Ford hasn't provided you a singular option for the head-up display on its own. Similarly over here, if you want the upgraded 10-speaker Bang & Olufsen system, which includes a subwoofer, you'll have to go for the premium model. Indeed, over here, the Style and Sense models have not got a subwoofer and have got a 7-speaker configuration instead. It will do well across the sound frequency range, but of course, if you are a bit more of a music lover or an audiophile, certainly do consider the premium model for that audio system alone. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system and some extra information in terms of the cabin noise that I recorded within the vehicle, make sure you check out my dedicated video that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. Moving on, we get onto storage, and here it's actually pretty disappointing that the manufacturer has not optimized the glove box for right-hand drive vehicles, which might take the UK crowd by surprise given Ford's presence in the market. Nonetheless, towards the center console, you've got that movable 14.6-inch display, underneath which you will find a non-slip area and also 2 USB Type-C ports, which allow you to charge and also connect up to the infotainment system. Further down, you have got angled areas to place 2 smartphones, and one of these areas also doubles up as a wireless charger in the Select and Premium trims. Then further down, you've got 2 cup holders and also an absolutely humongous area underneath the center armrest. Here you've also got a tray which can be handy for placing keys or your wireless fob, and also you have got a little compartment which can be customized. It's also been lined in fabric which prevents any sort of loose change or keys from rattling about. Now, underneath the center console, you've also got another area where there's also a non-slip material as well, which will suffice for taking, let's say, a smaller size bag or purse. In terms of the door bins, the front 2 are actually pretty large and will accommodate a 500ml bottle with ease alongside some small to medium sized valuables, while the rear 2 are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited. Then you've also got a pull-down armrest compartment which reveals 2 cup holders. And in terms of convenience, you've got 2 USB Type-C ports which are found towards the rear portion of the center console. Now, of course, when it comes to transporting goods, we have to talk about its boot. And here you've got between 567 to 572 litres with the seats in place. And if you were to drop them down, this extends up to 1,505 litres to 1,510 litres. In case you're wondering why there's a bit of a discrepancy in terms of the figures, that it really depends in terms of if you have the subwoofer, in other words, the premium trim with the Bang & Olufsen system. In terms of convenience, you've got a manual tailgate as standard. However, this moves over to a power tailgate in the premium trim, although it does make a little bit of a racket when it comes to closing the tailgate where it constantly beeps. And as far as I can tell, you can't actually disable it via the infotainment system. Nonetheless, when it is opened up, you have got that hatchback design, and as someone who's just under 6 foot, I had no problems whatsoever when it came to accessing the rear of the vehicle. Furthermore, it's great to see that you've got 60/40 rear split folding seats with an integrated ski latch, a completely flat floor, and a pretty large underfloor compartment, which will suffice for taking your charging cables, or indeed if you want to just compartmentalize your boot. Furthermore, it is worth highlighting over here that there is no frunk, in other words a compartment underneath the bonnet, which doesn't really bother me in the slightest given the amount of space you've got at the back of the vehicle. As for hauling some extra goods, you have got 75 kilograms of roof load capacity, and in terms of its max towing rate for unbraked trailers, it sits at 750 kilograms, and this moves over to 1000 kilograms for brake trailers. Not exactly the best sort of figure, considering some of its competitors offer a lot better capacity. Aside from transporting goods, what about when it comes to seat and comfort? Well, for the driver in the style trim, you've got 6-way manual controls. If, however, you want 12-way power controls with a memory function and massage and heated functionality for both front occupants, then you have to go for the Select or Premium. This can be added for an additional £900 within the style trim. No matter which model you go for, however, all the trims have got 6-way manual controls for the passenger. In terms of the comfort levels, I had no problems whatsoever. The seats themselves were very accommodating. And similarly at the back, as someone who's just under 6 foot, headroom and legroom didn't feel overly hemmed in. In fact, I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised, namely while sat in the rear outer seats. Of course, in terms of the middle seat, it does feel a little bit more limited in terms of headroom, but it should certainly suffice, namely when it comes to shorter journeys. And it is also worth highlighting over here that the manufacturer has kept almost a near flat footwell design, which is very much appreciated because it allows you to stretch out your legs, or of course if you've got that rear middle occupant, they won't be left too uncomfortable. Now, I would also like to highlight over here that in the premium model you've got a panoramic roof, which I absolutely love because it brings in some nice light within the cabin. Although it's worth highlighting over here that you do not have any sort of sunshade, so if that's something that you're looking for, then you might want to look into some aftermarket solutions or indeed for an additional accessory. Aside from this, and very much similar to what you'd find on some competitor products, including from what you find from the Volkswagen Group, there's a pressure sensor that's found within the driver's seat. And while this is very intuitive as a single occupant going in and out of the vehicle, it does mean that if you've got other people who are sat within, the vehicle will automatically power down as soon as you step outside. A way to override this is by reaching over to the steering column and pressing the on and off switch, or the on and off touch-based button that's found towards the infotainment system, therefore meaning that you can still resume media playback or indeed your climate controls while the driver is outside of the vehicle. Next up we get onto its exterior design. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. Subjectively, I don't think it looks anything like the original Capri, even though Ford might argue that its side silhouette is somewhat reminiscent to the original model. But how can it be, because it's an SUV after all? Still, I do think it's a good looking SUV, and indeed over here I would prefer it over the equivalent Volkswagen. Namely at the front it's got this cute bubble shaped design, thanks to the fact that the headlights have got this quite unique look. Towards the side you have got 19-inch alloys that come fitted as standard, and this moves up to 20-inch alloys in the premium trim, and you can go for optional 19 to 21-inch alloys, where the latter actually being pictured, and this will cost you between £390 to £1,000. As for the rear, you've got a really nice sort of modern flair to the vehicle with the nice sort of branding to it. In terms of your colour options, it comes as standard in frozen white. If however you want one of the premium paints, black, grey, red, yellow or the pictured blue, it'll set you back an additional £800. Moving on, we get on to safety, and here it was tested by Euro NCAP and awarded the full 5 out of 5 stars, scoring 89% in adult occupancy, 86% in child occupancy, and 72% in its safety assist scores. So yes, it will keep you pretty safe on the road in the unlikely event of a serious accident. Furthermore, you've got a whole set of driver assistance systems that come featured as standard. Intelligent adaptive cruise control with stop and go technology, which does actually work a treat by keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle without feeling too jerky. Then you've got lane keeping aid with lane departure warning, traffic sign recognition, pre-collision assist and evasive steering assist. Now you can also go for the driver assistant pack, which will add driver alert, lane centering with lane change assist, and this does actually work pretty well. In the style model it'll cost an additional £2,200, in the select Select £1,800 and in the Premium model £1,300. Now, while these driver assistance systems are certainly appreciated, they become re-enabled every single time you step inside the vehicle, just due to regulatory requirements, which I do think is a little bit silly. Here, certain manufacturers have provided you a way of quickly disabling it via shortcuts that can be found on the steering wheel or the stalks, but unfortunately that's not the case with the Ford Capri. Instead, you're going to have to faff around with the infotainment system. Thankfully over here, the manufacturer has thought about this in certain ways by having a drop-down menu which you can assign to the driver assistance systems, and then from here you can then quickly disable the ones that you don't want. Still, I just wish it was a little bit more intuitive to do, especially if you're on the move. Finally, we should talk about parking, and here you've got a 9.7 to 11 meter turning circle, which is actually pretty tight, therefore making maneuverability a breeze. Furthermore, you've got front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera that come fitted as standard. It is worth mentioning, however, that the camera can be a little bit hard to see, and for some reason Ford has not optimized it, and as a result, at the time of filming, it means that the camera is only at the top half of the 14.6-inch display, meaning that it can feel a little bit small and a little bit hard to see your surroundings, despite the fact that you've got a good sort of resolution. So hopefully the manufacturer can address this in a future firmware update by further optimizing the display and not make it feel a little bit wasted. Now, if you do want a little bit of extra peace of mind, you might want to go for the driver assistance pack, because this will add active park assist and also 360-degree cameras, therefore giving you even better vision around the vehicle. And on that note, you've got good sort of visibility at the front and at the side, and while at the rear it can be a little bit limited just due to the sloping roofline and the fact that you've got no wiper, the addition of that rear view camera, or indeed the 360-degree cameras if you go for the additional pack, means that you have got good sort of visibility even when you're reversing out of a space. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the Ford Capri. And if you do look past its somewhat legendary name, you will find yourself a pretty competent all-electric SUV that goes toe-to-toe with some of its key competitors. Here you've got fantastic electric range, then you've got good sort of driver assistance systems that come featured as standard across the entire trim range, good use of technology that has also been optimized, decent amount of headroom and legroom for your front and rear occupants, and also a pretty big boot. However, certain considerations are the fact that its suspension system hasn't exactly been optimized for families, and by that I mean it would have been great to see a more advanced configuration, or indeed something that was a little bit softer tuned. Then in terms of its braking performance, it's pretty poor. At least if you're going to be chucking around winding country routes in the all-wheel drive model, you'll feel a little bit uneasy in terms of the overall braking point, and more importantly is its overall asking price, which is a little bit steeper than its sibling, the VW ID.5, or of course some of its alternatives out there, some of which I've reviewed and be down in the description below for your own consideration. Effectively, what I'm trying to convey over here is the Ford Capri is actually a pretty good package, although can be a little bit pricey. However, if you can find a good deal for it, then it's certainly worth considering. Speaking of which, if you do want to find some of the best ones for it, make sure you check out down in the description below or the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. Now, I'd be curious to know what you make of the Ford Capri, be it in terms of the name that Ford has brought back, in terms of the overall SUV segment, or indeed how it compares to some of the other all-electric SUVs down in the comment section below. Now, if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hope you see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.